Welcome, everyone. I see we have about 15 or so people to have joined us. We'll get started here in just a couple minutes. Hello and welcome, everyone. We'll get started here in just a few minutes. We're giving a few more people a chance to get logged in, and we'll get started. Welcome. I am Andrew Antonio, Vice President of Chamber and Quality of Life at Greater Lafayette Commerce, and I'll be our MC today for the Quarterly Development Series, Strategy Series, Webinar Series with Patrick Fraser, titled Playbook for Success, Building Your Game Plan for Your COVID Comeback Story. This is the third and final installment of the QDS2 COVID-19 Strategies Webinar Series. We understand that COVID-19 and the impact that it will have on our community is at the forefront of everyone's minds. Since we won't be able to meet in person for a luncheon like we usually do, we have designed a series of webinars addressing COVID-19 concerns, updates, and resources available to businesses and business owners and community members and how we'll reemerge as these things improve. Stay tuned until the end of the webinar for more information on upcoming webinars with state legislators, other local business owners, and other key important topics. As you know, we are constantly watching the developments and reevaluating what information would be most beneficial to our membership and the community. I'm honored this morning to present our speaker, Patrick Fraser. Patrick is the CEO, executive coach, and total quality improvement facilitator of his business, The Coaching Authority, where he has helped over 100 organizations and 1,500 individuals. I first met Patrick when he approached Greater Lafayette Commerce about a collaboration that we now call Elite Excel. This is probably the 6th or 7th presentation that Patrick has put together for our GLC members and the business community, and we thank him for his time and contributions. Professional organizations that Patrick belongs to include Gazelle International Associate, Traction, Six Sigma Healthcare. He's also an Adventures in Attitude Facilitator. His certifications include Certified Total Quality Facilitator, Certified Dialogue Administrator of Organizational Assessment, Certified Executive Coach, and Certified Business Improvement Specialist. His hobbies and interests include basketball and travel. He's been married for 36 years. He has 4 daughters, 9 grandsons, and I heard his first granddaughter is on the way. So congratulations to Patrick. Before we get started, I'd like to thank all of our businesses that are Great Life at Commerce members, which makes this event possible, and especially to our sponsors. American Structure Point, Centier Bank, Henriot Group, HWC Engineering, Keystone Architecture, Maximus Logistics, Proactive MD, Purdue Federal Credit Union, Security Federal Savings Bank, Star Associates, T-Bird Designs, Tippecanoe Building Trades Council, Wintech powered by Tipmont. Thank you for your sponsorship and your continued support. Please join me now in welcoming Patrick Fraser.
Thank you, Andrew. So are the slides up there? Are we good to go? All right. So again, Patrick Fraser from the Coaching Authority. And today we want to talk a little bit about your comeback story from COVID-19. So as we go through the material, just a couple of helpful hints as we go through that we will pause throughout the presentation for questions. If you just use the chat box, then we will check in and try to answer those as we go along. So we'll go ahead and get started. As I started to prepare for today's presentation, I started thinking about some of the great comebacks in local history. And according to Bleacher Report, there are 4 or 5 comebacks or great comebacks just locally here to where we live. And we go back to, of course, one of my favorites is Indiana Pacers back in 1995, came back from an 8-point deficit in just 11 seconds. And for those of you that are Reggie Miller fans, you'll probably remember he's managed to scrap together 8 points to in the last 11 seconds to stun the New York Knicks. Then you probably remember the 21-point deficit that Peyton Manning championed against the previous Super Bowl champions in the final 5 minutes of a Monday night football game. That was a little dramatic back in 2003. And then you probably remember the 12-run deficit in 2001 from the Cleveland Indians over the Seattle Mariners. What made that even more interesting and dramatic, it all happened after the 7th inning. And then for those that might be listening from Michigan, the 38-3 comeback in under 10 minutes left in the 3rd quarter to beat the Northwestern Wildcats. So, as I got to thinking about great comebacks, I thought, well, what is it that they all had in common? And they all had a vision. They all believed that they could still win, and they knew that the game wasn't over. They had a winning mindset. They knew that they could win. They believed that they could win, and they had the right mindset. And that's what we want to talk about today is what's your mindset? What's your comeback story? What if the greatest comeback story ever told was your business's comeback story? So let's take a look at some of those. Just keep in mind as we go that your words matter. If you're going to have a winning mindset, you need to change your words. You need to use those words that purvey hope, that look at the solution, not just the problem, and really have and lead that mindset to a champion season or a great comeback, and be the ones that shine the light of hope throughout the organization and into our community. As I mentioned, Pat Frazier of the Coaching Authority, and I serve the community as an executive coach, and a coach is someone that tells you something maybe that you don't want to hear, or sees something that you don't want to see, so that you can become what you've always known you could be. And that's a great quote by Tom Landry. And it's a guiding light for me as an executive coach to be that type of consultant or person that's a coach that helps people and organizations grow into the businesses that they want to be.
So this is not showing.
What's not showing?
Where's your Zoom? Your slideshow. Where's your Zoom?
Oh, Zoom.
Yeah.
The slides are not showing. Okay.
Can you just pull it off to the side?
Talk a little bit about help is on the way, but we're going to spend most of our time looking at a playbook for opening up or back to work, or getting back in to opening up our businesses, not just so that we can survive, but so that we can thrive. So, and that'll require that we pivot, playing to win, not just playing not to lose. Who's our who, what's our what's the problem to be solved, and how will we do that? So we'll take a look at a lot of different things. We'll have some pauses for reflection throughout the presentation. And as we go through the presentation, I would like for you to kind of think about what we'll have to change as a result of what's happening now. So the key is having a playbook to make our comeback. The first thing I look at is, what's the road ahead of us, and or what's that battlefield? As you can see, we're facing something that's a global pandemic, right? And we learn more about the disease. We learn every day. We learn more about the contagion. We learn more about the therapies. We learn more about things. There's a lot that we don't know about the pandemic. And as we go, we've seen and heard things like, well, we've got to flatten the curve. Well, what does that mean? Well, when we look at the rate of infection of the pandemic and our ability to treat those that are infected, we saw early on that the disease itself had the ability to overload our health systems. So in the early stages of this, the focus was really maintaining capacity within our health systems. So you started to hear we have to flatten the curve. And that was really the focus at that time. And it was really something that we needed to flatten the curve so that we had the ability to treat those that are infected or the most severe, vulnerable amongst us. Then you probably heard things about the hammer and the dance, right? And what's that all about? We're really talking about how contagious this infectious disease is. How do we maintain a certain contagion level? And once we tamp down or flatten the curve, right, then we have to keep it at a certain level. And the focus here is the suppression of reoccurrence and finding that right balance between control guidelines and the infection surge or reoccurrence. So that's where we started hearing about things like proper testing and contact tracing and quarantining and isolating. And what if we allow these businesses to open and these businesses to stay closed? And how do we protect those that are most vulnerable? So our focus is really around suppression of reoccurrence. So that's somewhat of the battlefield that we're on. this slide really kind of speaks to, um, if you look at this pandemic from a global perspective, you could see the different countries are impacted in different ways, and they're in different stages of the hammer and the dance, right? Some would suggest that we're under the curve now, and we're declining based off of the number of infections and the number of deaths and that sort of thing, and our ability to test and trace and treat. But I think this is interesting because it shows that different countries, different regions are at different stages of their hammer and their dance as we go through it. So we kind of want to look at what's it like here in the United States? What's it like here in Indiana? What's it like here at our county and our cities? If you look at it from an economic perspective, right, clearly there's a U.S. economic impact where we're hearing about over 30 million are unemployed, and a statistic I heard last week that 7.5 businesses are at risk of closing. Well, what does that economic recovery curve look like? Well, what we know is that when we're under the hammer, the ability for us to resolve or address any type of issues that we're hit with, right? It's kind of like there's a quote Mike Tyson has used, and maybe you've heard it. He says, you know, everybody has a plan to get punched in the mouth. Well, our punch in the mouth came in March, right? So we had to resolve some immediate challenges to workforce, customers, and partners. Then we moved into a phase of somewhat of resistance, right? How do we resist going out of business and getting knocked out of the ring, right? We had to address immediate cash flow issues and how can we survive, not just today, but through whatever sanctions or guidelines we had to now operate our businesses under. Then we start talking about returning back to business. And that's kind of where we're in the dance phase, right? Where we've got testing, tracing, quarantining, isolation, and those sorts of activities going on. How do we return to business under those guidelines? And then how do we adapt to those, right? What are the adaptations we need to make in this new world that we're all living and trying to do business in? So if you look at the U.S. GDP, right, we try to look at it and say, what's the return going to look like, right? And it depends on whose model you look at or whose op-ed you read, but it could be something that's a quick May reboot, right? The most optimistic says, well, it's gonna, you know, it's down and there's gonna be a sharp ascent to greatness, to the greatest economy that we've ever had. Or there are some that are more conservative that say, oh, it's going to be kind of, you know, we're not done getting to the apex or the bottom yet, and we're probably going to bottom out in May and early June before we start a slow ascent. And then there's others that say, yeah, it's going to be kind of a gentle ride down and a gentle ride up, and it's going to take us longer. The point is that that we really don't know what that's going to look like. There are many different models, and there's a lot of different variables that make it very complex to forecast what that's going to look like. If you look at what the economic recovery might look like, there are different shapes based off of different industries, right? If you look at Zoom, what the recovery for Zoom might look like. It might be a very quick and then just kind of flatten out at a high point, the highest point. I read somewhere that a year ago in March, there were some 20 million Zoom users. And then in March of 2020, there was 200 million Zoom users. It seems everybody is using Zoom and Skype and FaceTime and Google Hangouts. So the economic recovery of those technologies spiked quickly and then pretty much will level out. But if you look at things like Home Depot, right, it kind of has a slower descent and then a kind of a nice U shape. If you look at what's the economic recovery of our cruise lines, right? It took a very sharp decline and just bottomed out. And if you look at our airlines, it could be something similar. Who knows what their recovery shape will look like? Will it look like a U? Will it look like an L? Will it look like a V? Um, it depends on the industry that we're at. And once again, it depends on a lot of variables that make this very complex. So the key here is, what is your industry recovery looking like? What do we think it's going to look like? Is it going to be more of a V shape, or is it going to be more of an L shape, or is it going to be a U shape, or what's it going to look like? And then what's your business going to look like? And we have to factor in what that might look like geographically. And if you have a business that's headquartered here in Lafayette, but you have businesses that are in other states or even other counties, you may see that that recovery shape looks a little bit different, right? So it can vary by industry, geography, and many different factors as we go through here too. It can also depend on what kinds of guidelines that we have that are controlling the dance phase. So there's a lot of things that go into what your economic recovery would look like. If you've ever heard of the term VUCA, right? I think it's a military term is the source of it, but I think it kind of describes the current condition that we're in. You know, it's an environment that's highly volatile, a great amount of uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And if you kind of look at the conditions or situation that we're in today with COVID, it certainly meets that criteria. So we kind of need to look at building our comeback story under the premise of a VUCA world, right? In other words, what happens to the economy? Do we believe it'll be a VU or an L? What happens to my industry? Will the industry itself survive? Will it thrive? Or will it nosedive? Is my company safe now, right? Maybe it's safe now in a cash position. I read just the other day ago, most small businesses have between 25 and 30 days of cash on hand. They're probably at a point where cash is becoming tight. You know, we've been into this for, I think, our 7th, going into our 8th week of this. So is it safe now? Will it be safe in the future? What about our people, right? There's 30 million people in the unemployment market now. On one hand, that's a terrible thing. But if, on the other hand, if you need people, it's a great time to get great talent, right? What's the overall health of my business, my people, my company? But the key point that I think is good to reflect on is, how do I lead and manage in this VUCA world, right? And I want to talk a little bit about some of that today. I'm always reminded that, you know, you can't let what you don't know keep you from doing what you do know, right? So, but there's an awful lot that we don't know, right? Peter Drucker says the greatest danger in any time of turbulence is not the turbulence itself or COVID itself, but to act with yesterday's logic. You see, we're in a different place now than we were 2 months ago, 3 months ago, right? And if we run our businesses on the same principles that we run, or the same set of rules and logic that we ran 3 months ago, it's going to be tough sledding for us, right? So there's 5 things that we don't know, right, that we have to consider in our comeback story. The overall severity of the pandemic and the pattern of the disease progression, right? We don't know the level of collaboration between countries, sharing of data and information and therapies and vaccines, and the ability of the virus to spread, right? The healthcare system's response, do they have the capacity? We've heard things about PPEs and ventilators and healthcare workers, the ability for them to respond to those that are affected by the disease. The economic consequences of the crisis. Many believe the economic consequences of the crisis are greater than the disease itself and how many people it will ultimately affect. The level of social cohesion in response to the crisis. Are we all in this together, or are we all going to do our own thing? And how will that affect our ability to tamp down, to hammer down the disease, and then to hold it down or to suppress it, as we talked about in the dance phase and the post-dance. Help is on the way. I thought this was kind of some interesting information a colleague had provided, but you know, we've got drugs that are in various stages of approval that are being repurposed. We're hearing about those. There's not just one, but there's over a half a dozen that are being repurposed and looked at as how it treats the disease and the effectiveness of it. Antibodies, we're seeing, you know, antibody therapy helpful in helping us stage off the disease, and then vaccines. When will a vaccine be available? So how long are we going to be on the battlefield? How long are we going to continue to play the game? And if those of us are sick and need to be helped, the mortality of the disease and our ability to manage that. We look at, you know, when you go into battle, you got to say, okay, what's the battlefield look like? What's it look like now? Where's the battle heading? And where's our business, right? Where's our business right now? How are we doing? How equipped for battle are we? We like to look at, you know, 7 different attributes of agile growth. 3 months ago, I was quite happy working with businesses in the area, talking to them about scaling up and growing their business and doubling or tripling their business in a 3 to 5 year period. And we would look at 7 different areas, and that is still relevant, but we really want to dial into just a couple of key areas. So we'll look at some of those in a moment, but I thought it would be good to pause for just a couple of minutes, right? So just in silence for a couple of minutes, I'd like for everybody on the call just to reflect, what's your battlefield look like? Are you looking at a U-shape, L-shape, V-shape battlefield? And where's your business on that battlefield? Where are you? Are you prepared? So just a quick 90-minute or 90-second to 2-minute reflection, and we'll be looking at the chat box before we dive into the rest of the presentation. But just a quick 2 minutes of silence, and then we'll just get back at it. So I'll just give it about 30 seconds or a minute. So just click right here.
So I don't know if you want to move this over or something. So right now there's nothing yet.
Okay, if you see anything, just speak up. Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and get started again here. I see Scott's got a note in the chat box that Greater Lafayette Chamber is hopeful for a V-shaped recovery and planning for a slow U. So That's great. So we kind of want to build our comeback story based off of what we believe that battlefield looks like and what our business will look like, and is our business prepared for it. So let's kind of continue to move through the slides here. Oops. So let's take a look at the playbook, opening up America and bringing Indiana back. Just a couple of quick, just foundational slides. On April 16th, President Trump kind of laid out a phased approach for opening up America again. And basically his considerations were based on data, trying to make decisions of readiness, data-based, mitigating any risk of reoccurrence. So that's the dance piece that we talked about earlier. Protecting our most vulnerable. We've heard the disease seems to have a more ravaging effect on our older population, as well as those that have pre-existing conditions, but protecting them. And then the phased approach would also allow for governors at the state level to implement phases based off of what they feel is right for their state, as well as county and city based. Opening up America again really took a look at criteria within each region, gating criteria that looked at what are the symptoms, right? Is there a trend or a trajectory that we're seeing up or down or flat in COVID-like symptoms? How many cases are we actually documenting? Once again, looking at the trends. Is it up, down, or flat? And then the hospital capacity, our ability to treat those. And then President Trump laid out basically 3 phases of what that might look like, again, subject to the governors and the counties plan. Then on May 1st, our Governor Holcomb laid out his Back on Track Indiana plan, and looked at 4 guiding principles, looked at the number of hospitalized, again, the trend there, our surge capacity at its peak, that peak or flattening the curve, the surge point, our ability to test, and our ability to trace. Those were his guiding principles in his 5-stage plan. And then basically laid out dates for the 5 stages that basically gets Indiana back on track by July 4th. For many of us in the state of Indiana, we moved into stage 2 on Monday morning, and stage 2 allows for things like restaurants and retail, office settings, those sorts of things, to kind of start to put our toe in the water at like 50% capacity in some things. And manufacturing, of course, could go back based off of demand. So so between President Trump and Governor Holcomb, these are kind of how do we get back on track, back to work, and so what kind of that's the battlefield that and the guidelines that we have to work with. Back in the Winter Olympics in Sochi, there was, some of you may remember, a snowboarder by the name of Shaun White. And there's an interesting story, I think, about Shaun White. He was at the top of his game. He was the premier snowboarder in the world. And he came, and in fact, whenever he would get into a competition, it's told that people would take bets on who would come in second, right? Because they knew that Shaun White was the was the guy that was going to walk away with a gold medal. Well, something interesting happened in the Sochi Olympics. He actually put up his first couple of runs in the finals and scored quite well. And then in his run, people wondered, would Shaun White just really go all out and go for the gold, or would he just kind of play it safe and just kind of coast to a gold medal? Well, he decided to kind of play it safe, play to not lose, and put a pretty decent score up there. And then there was a Russian-born Swiss snowboarder by the name of, gosh, I can't even pronounce his name, but everybody called him iPod. He was a young guy. He had some pretty decent scores going into the final round, and he realized that there was a window open. Shaun White put up a decent score, but if he scored a perfect run, right, he could actually dethrone the champion. So he did. He just went out and he just you know, played to win, right? And he posted a perfect score, and at the end, he ended up getting the gold medal. And that was really interesting. The world was shocked because they thought that Shaun White would be hands down the gold medal winner. As it turns out, iPod was getting the gold. So, so that was kind of shocked the world, and that would be a great story if we just stopped there. We could say, well, are you playing it safe? Are you playing not to lose? Or are you playing to win? Right. But then in the 2014 Winter Olympics, right, actually in the next Olympics, he came back and he actually, the next set of Olympics 4 years later, he came back and won the gold medal for the United States. And he was the first and only snowboarder to win 3 gold medals. So he actually had a great comeback story, but he had to wait 4 years for it. But he had the comeback because the first Olympics, he played it safe and he learned his lesson. And then he made a great comeback story in the next Olympics. So the question for us as businesses, how does that apply, is are we building our comeback story to win, or are we playing to not lose? Are we just trying to be present, the last man standing? That might be a strategy, but are you playing to win or playing to not lose? I think that's a great lesson that we learn in sports there. So what's our pivot? What's our next move, right? Taking a look at our previous expectations. Do we need to rethink some of our assumptions or previous expectations? None of us in January this year, we looked at our forecast that we had laid out from fourth quarter last year to look at what does 2020 look like. When we started in January looking at the year and how it was going to match up against our forecast, I don't think any one of us would have said, hey, you know what? I'm planning for a pandemic that's gonna grind the U.S. economy and the world to a halt, right? So we need to relook at what our expectations are. What are our expectations around the curve, right? We're in a VUCA world. What are our consumers' value now, right? It's different than it is today than it was 3 months, 6 months ago. What are some of the new threats? What are the emerging competitors that are out there? What are the new business models, and what are the ecosystems that we need to build in order to collaborate, work together, and succeed in this new world? What are the strengths and talents and capabilities that we have, and the relationships that we need to have, and the assets that we have to go into battle, and what's important in this new world? So you see, we're going to have to pivot and kind of take a fresh look at where we're at. Marshall Goldsmith is fond of saying, what got you here won't get you there. And I think that's great advice and counsel for each of us. Now, what got us to this point today may very well be the one thing that keeps us from getting the things that we want tomorrow, or the desirable outcomes for our business. They say you're only as strong as your foundation. And as we build our comeback story, I want to take a look at a couple of things. As I mentioned earlier, we look at 7 attributes of agile growth, but really right now we got to look at the key foundational things. Is our executive team strong? Do we have great trust? Is there commitment and accountability, as Patrick Lencioni would say? Is the executive team regularly looking at our strategy, looking at the cracks, looking at the ray of hope and light, and pushing to the edge? Are we executing relentlessly? Are we focused on results? From a talent perspective, do we have the right people doing the right things at the right time? Are we all aligned? Is the organization's core purpose and core values crystal clear at this time? Are we recruiting the right people, attracting, retaining the right talent in order to execute this strategy in this new world? And again, our foundation, we're going to look at cash flow, right? Like in any business and like in the game of Monopoly, when you run out of cash, game is over, right? So we got to look at the cash flow. We got to make sure that we maintain profitability that keeps us liquid, that allows us to expand and grow when we get to the other side. Organizations need to understand what's profitable, what's not, what's marginal. The rules have changed, so our profitability models may have changed as well. So we really have to look at our a firm foundation and these 4 or 5 things as we go forward. The tool set that we use, here's just a few of them that just kind of give you an idea. You know, how do we make sure our team is healthy? You know, how do we make sure that we're have a solid core purpose and our values? Cash flow, what's the power one? What's our cash story and our execution strategy? What's our 13-week race? You know, just kind of looking at every quarter as a 13-week sprint. And how do we stay focused, aligned, and executing on our most important priorities? Then we look at our agile accelerators. There's a foundation, and we look at the accelerators. The accelerators, we kind of look at some things, strategy, and you know, what's our customer? So we want to build this firm foundation, but then we also want to accelerate so that while we hope that it's a V-shaped recovery, and then we say, well, it could be a U-shaped. What can we do to accelerate that U-shape into more of a V-shape? And some of the tools that we look at there, obviously, who's our core customer, who's our who, what's our brand promise, what's our execution clock look like, what's the customer experience, really looking at the customer, looking at our core competencies, looking at some of the things that that we need to look at so that we can accelerate into this bold new world. So I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about a couple of tools that you can use to build your comeback story, right? So I picked 3 that I think that speak to all of us, and I just kind of walk through what that might look like. And I'd encourage, as I go through these, just to take notes, and then as we go through each one of these, I'll give you a couple of minutes to pause and reflect and write down your thoughts, so that when we get done this afternoon, you have something that's executable, something that you could take away, something that you could start applying today to build your comeback story so that you thrive. Look, it's not my intent to help people just simply survive. I really believe there's an opportunity for each one of us to take where we're at on the battlefield and to really thrive as we kind of move boldly into this new world ahead of us. So the first thing that we look at is our core customer. Our core customer, Robert Bloom, The Inside Advantage, really taught some things about really getting crystal clear understanding of who's our who, right? And who's our who may have changed right now, okay? There's, it's a whole new world out there, and we all know that, but have we paused and reflected on who is our core customer now? Who's that real person with real wants and needs and fears? What are they afraid of right now? What's the problem to be solved? Who's that core customer that'll buy for an optimum profit, right? Not those ones that are going to beat us up on price and throw us into a market of being a commodity. Who's that customers, and what are their buying behaviors, right? Do they exist today in our database, or do we need to go out and get them? One of the stories we love to talk about is a company called South Shore, and really they're a company that actually operates up in Canada, but you would probably know this company. They're basically their business model is like IKEA. You know, they're in this business of flat pack furniture. The interesting thing is when they went through the core customer experience, about 15 minutes into it, I'm told, they realized that they had two very different buyers or consumers. They had an in-store consumer and they had an online consumer, right? So then they started developing what are the attributes of the in-store buyer, and they learned, well, they were between 25 and 44, that they were a couple, and they were both employed full-time, double income. They had an annual income that was maybe even still below average. They had a couple of kids, right? And they generally made purchasing decisions together. So when they came into the store, Michelle is what they named her, right? She was different than Sarah. Sarah's avatar was more like 25 to 34. She was employed full time. She had an income of 20 to, I think, 50,000, 54,000. She too was in a household with a couple of adults without children, and she typically purchased online 1 or 2 articles every time that she visited their website. So they really had two different profiles and avatars. What's important about this story is they realized that over time that their business was shaping and morphing more to meet the needs of Sarah than it was Michelle. And I chose this particular case study because I think that's where we're all living right now. We're seeing our businesses kind of move into what can we do online? What can we do to meet the needs of our customers or clients when we have these guidelines around social distancing, right? And people are moving to more of an online experience. So what I'd encourage you to do is look at your business, what's your customer look like, and what's your online customer look like, and then start reshaping your marketing collateral and your sales process around meeting the needs of that online customer. The resource we use looks like this. It's pretty easy for you and your leadership team to work through, but who's your who, right? What do they look like? So identify the names of 4 or 5 of real customers or ideal customers, right? And then underneath the name in each bubble, what's that particular characteristic of that customer that makes them an ideal customer? So I generally have my teams fill it out independently, quietly, and allow them 5 to 10 minutes to pause and reflect and fill this out. And they'll fill out the left side. And then we'll get together as a leadership team and we'll talk about what are the areas of concentration. And you almost always find that 2 or 3 customer names appear on everybody's sheet, and you start talking about what that characteristic is, and you start listing and finding the alignment around what those characteristics are of your core customer. And then you close the exercise up and say, in 10 to 15 words, what does our core customer look like, right? What would it look like? And to where you end up with something like what South Shore ended up with theirs, and actually name it, right? Is this Joey or Bob or Michelle or Sarah? But once you name it, right, then people start to associate those characteristics with that. So the second part of looking at the customer is really what's that problem that they have to solve. Clayton Christensen has a great video out there on the problem to solve, and it's really understanding what that customer's problem to solve is. You see, the problems that our customers have today may not be the same problems, probably not the same intensity of a problem as it was 3-4 months ago. And we really need to understand what their problem to solve is. Once we can identify what that problem to solve is and what that pain point is then we can start to come back and reinvent or innovate. So I want to pause for, again, 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes max. And I want you to reflect, who's your who and what's the problem that they have to be solved, right? You see, so our comeback story, we really have to feature our customers, right? Who's your who and what's the problem to be solved? So I'm just going to give you about 90 seconds of silence. And if you have a question, please type it in the chat box and we'll look at the chat box before we resume the presentation. So. Okay, great. So here's a couple of tips, I guess I would say, if you're listening. Write these down when you pause and reflect and write your thoughts down. You're 2 times more likely to remember and, what's more important, apply those things that you wrote down. So if you came today for a 90-day webinar to get something, the key for any coach is not about providing academic information or ethereal advice or counsel. It's about how you apply that. That's going to allow you to build your comeback story. So as we're going through the presentation, jot down notes, jot down those things you want to take away from here. When you jot them down or write it down, you're 2 times more likely to take action on that. So let's continue with our presentation. So we've talked about your core customer, who's your who, and what's the problem to be solved. So the next thing we want to look at really in our foundation is, what are the strengths inherent to our company's success or our core competencies? What are you really, really, really good at, right? What are those operational activities, those things, systems or processes that we're an expert at, right? Things that create value for our clients. Those are the things that, by the way, that are critical to our long-term growth. You know, we look at the core competencies and we say, how can I match that against the problem to be solved? And many times it's a combination of things. It can be a combination of the resources that we have, physical resources or assets, or it could be the capabilities that we possess. And those resources and capabilities give us a strategic value to our clients that that play out as a competitive advantage for us. So when I look at core competencies, I think of, okay, what are the processes that this organization has, or systems or activities? They look very simple at the surface, right? But when you start to peel it back, you realize that there's been a lot of time, effort, energy, honing or developing that particular competency over the years. It could be things that, well, there are those things that we're really, really good at. If I were to ask you, what do you think of when you think of the company Nordstrom, right? Most all of us would say, hey, they're famous for customer service or customer care, right? And if you ever shop there, you probably understand that. But you know, their customer service is one of their core competencies in action, and that's key. It's something that they've developed and they've honed over the years, but it's something that that they use that competency for the customer's advantage, right? To create a competitive advantage to serve their customers' need. So um, it's it's something that Nordstrom over the years, you know, we see it from the surface, but it's something that they recruit people that have certain attributes that allow them to develop an outstanding customer experience. It's how they train their people. It's how they reward and recognize their associates. They have systems in the background that are supporting that customer experience or customer journey that Joey Coleman talks about in his work. And we probably all heard examples of it. We've probably heard of the one of somebody that brought in a tire, right? And people that know Nordstrom know that they don't sell tires, right? They sell about everything out of the world. They don't sell, you know, automobile equipment. But this customer was a long-standing customer, a loyal customer, and they brought in a tire and wanted to get a refund from it. So the manager said, "Well, sure." And as he looked, and they gave him their money back, right? Well, it was kind of a strange set of things, but the manager understood that this was a lifetime customer. They've been a very good customer, and they were just confused and didn't want to embarrass him. But so that really didn't add to the experience that they were trying to create, that outstanding customer service experience. So refunded their money. Another example is a friend of mine actually went into Nordstrom's and exchanged a coat, and he said, "Look, you know, I don't have a receipt. I don't have my credit card. I'm not sure what credit card I used to put it on there, but I know I bought it at Nordstrom." And the associate said, "No problem. What's your phone number?" So he looked through the phone number. They came back, and just with the phone number in a couple of seconds, they refunded my friend's money. Which, you know, it seems pretty simple on the surface, right? Okay, if you don't have it, you just have a phone number. Well, they've got systems in back, and they have to cross-check, and it has to be validated, it has to be protected, it has to be secure, and it's actually more of a complicated transaction than just simply giving the customer their money back. So the key here is those core competencies, those resources and systems and processes that you have in place that have been honed over the years that create an opportunity for you to serve your clients in a very unique and valuable way. Before you go off and say, that's a core competency, I want you to think of a couple of things, right? Is that core competency that you have, does it have potential access to a wide variety of markets, right? So if it's a core competency, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to use it the way you've always used it. It could be that it's a core competency that you could leverage and use in many different ways, in a broad variety of different markets and different ways. Does it make a significant contribution to the customer's benefit? Obviously, it's got to be a core competency. It's got to be something that people want or need, right? That makes it valuable. And it has to be something difficult for our competitors to imitate. Is it really a core competency if everybody's got it, right? So just look at a couple of what we call stress tests before you're so quick to say, yeah, that's a core competency. And by the way, we tend to ask companies to look at what's just 3 to 5 core competencies, things that you're really, really good at. Just a couple of quick examples. If you look at the different core competencies of some of these familiar companies and names, you can kind of see that they penetrate different markets over time. Honda, they felt like the engines and powertrains were their core competency. It played nicely not only to cars, but motorcycles and lawnmowers, right? Who'd have thought? 3M, we all know them from adhesives and coatings and and stuff, right? And, you know, we think of 3M for Post-it notes today, but also photographic material, pressure sensitive tapes, and coated abrasives. You see, they've leveraged their core competencies into new markets or different markets. And I think this is so helpful to all of us right now because it's not that we're on this battlefield without skill, competency, and talent. We just have to figure out how to leverage it to meet the customers that are out there today. What's the problem that has to be solved? And that is so exciting for me as a coach because you just need to sit down and you need to talk to businesses and people about what are your core competencies and what's the problem to be solved, and can we use those competencies to help and aid clients and prospects that are out there. So here's how this plays out. I just ask my leadership teams to once again, working independently, quietly, to come up with what they believe 3 to 5 what our core competencies are, meeting the attributes that we've talked about. You know, it's a process or system that we've developed. It's simple, but it's actually been honed over the years, and meeting the stress tests that we talked about. So reflecting what are independently, what are those 3 to 5, and then we pull people together and we start talking about what's the one of 5, the one core that we all believe is our most obvious core competency, you might say, or the most important to us right now, and look for those areas of alignment, and then start to, as I say, cuss and discuss, right? And until we get some alignment around just the simple 3 to 5 core competencies that we have at companies. Because once we have alignment as a leadership team on what those core competencies are, and we have visibility of who our core customer is and what the problem to be solved is, right? Then it becomes about just matching the competency with some product or service that satisfies that problem to be solved. So once again, just 90 seconds quickly to reflect. Let's start to piece together our comeback story. So what are your business's core competencies? What are those things that we're really, really good at? Those systems or process or talents and abilities that we have as an organization to build. And what if, right, where we're going looks completely different to where we've been, right? What got you here won't get you there. And if that's true, then let's look at the competencies that we have to go on this new journey, our comeback story. So a quick 90 seconds for reflection, and then we'll start to wind down here. Okay, great. All right, if there are any questions, I encourage you to use the chat box, and we'll be monitoring that as we kind of work toward the last couple of points here in the presentation. Let's move to the third the third asset I think that we have, or tool that we have to build our comeback story. And let's talk about the innovation window and the innovation process. So in his book, Dave Power, In the Curve Ahead, he really talks about why do companies stop growing, and how do we prevent companies from falling into the trap of flattening their growth strategically through time. So, and the key here is really pretty simple. He really kind of talks about as the chart shows, the story of revenue growth vertically and over time horizontally. And he talks about the companies in the beginning tend to be too fixated on their initial growth product set. In other words, whatever they started their company or whatever they launched their business product or service or idea, they tend to stick with that horse all the way to the end of the race. And they tend to think that, and maybe to some extent have unrealistic expectations that the growth curve will still continue at the same trajectory. And he says that's basically the problem that has to be solved for companies. And he says successful companies, strategic companies, here's what they do. He says they pause and reflect regularly and kind of talk about innovation, right? He says having time and every quarter or every month or twice a year to really kind of take a look at things and say, what do customers really want? What's their problem? What's changing in technology? What's changing demographically? What's changing in our government? What's changing in the world around us? And how can we continue to meet those changing needs so that we can continuously reinvent ourselves? Then he kind of moves into the innovation process. He says, "What's that look like on the inside?" He says, "Well, that's really pretty simple." He says, "Really, it's just it's a 4-step process." He says, "We got to listen to our customers, constantly listen to our customers." And one of the things that we teach our executive teams is when you get together every month, right, have 5 to 10 minutes just to talk about what are we hearing from our customers, right? And I'm not talking about, customer surveys or customer satisfaction surveys. We should be doing those on a regular basis anyway, but have time and space in our management meetings to talk about what are we hearing from our customers, and challenging everybody on your executive team just to have one deep conversation with at least one customer every month. But basically the point is to listen to the customer, to listen to what their needs are, find out what the pain points are, and then to bring that back to the leadership team so that we can leverage the collective intelligence. Secondly, he says we have to spend time designing a minimum viable offer. What will we offer? No bells and whistles, but just something that seems to meet the most of the pain, right? And we developed this MVO from a data perspective, right? What's the data telling us from listening, right? And develop a minimum viable offer, an MVO is what we call it, right? And then he says you kind of go experiment, or you roll that out into some sort of a prototype or some sort of an experiment or some sort of a beta test or stage, right? And you listen some more and you get some feedback, and then you make some adjustments, and then eventually you move into an implementation of a full scale and continue to update that product. And then you don't get comfortable, you just go back into the innovation window again that we talked about in the previous slide, where you're always talking about what's next. Is there something new that's kind of emerging that we need to address, or an opportunity? A good example of that is a company called Zoots, right? And it's not a real sexy business. It's basically dry cleaning, right? And not much has changed in dry cleaning over the years, but Zoots kind of upended it a little bit. It's basically they had listened to their customers, and they didn't like the fact that they had to come in, they had to drop their clothes off, and then they had to wait a couple days, and then they come back in, and they only could come in between 7 and 7, and they had to pick up their clothes and that sort of thing. Um, so what they came up with was a way for customers basically to drop off in a drop-off box, right? And that's nothing really new. Those are pretty common. But then they said, okay, we want to be able to have our customers pick up their dry cleaning. That's a little more complex, but that was a pain point, right, for them. They really, the customers didn't want to develop a lifelong relationship with the front desk at their cleaning service, right? So they just want to drop it off. They want to pick up clean clothes and in a way that was most convenient to them. So they innovated what they call pickup kiosk, and it's basically customers just simply identify themselves with a credit card, and an automated system pulls the laundry off the rack, unlocks an access door, and presents them with their laundry all clean, right? So there's no worrying about when the store is open, what the hours of operation, or whether they're in quarantine or not, right? It's just basically you drop it off, and then you show your credit, or you slide your card in there, and then it brings your clothes back to you after a day or so of cleaning. So they kind of innovated something, and so they now have 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365. You can always drop it off or pick up your clothes. So really interesting case study of people applying the innovation window and the innovation process, so that they're always reinventing and always coming up with something that meets the customer's pain point or the problem to be solved, and using their core competencies. So once again, just building your comeback story. What's the opportunity out there that you're seeing today, and what's our competency, and how can we match the problem to be solved with our competency to capitalize on that opportunity? So just a couple of minutes just to begin thinking about your innovation process or your innovation cycle and what that might look like. So just about 60, 90 seconds, and then we'll resume. Okay, once again, encourage you to use the chat box. Here's some, I guess, from tough love from your coach, right? The question is, do you have an innovation process? And if you did, what would your business look like today, right? So many of us would say, yeah, I really don't have that innovation process. We've been so busy making hay while the sun's shining. We really didn't think about what problems might exist tomorrow, and how we might react to those, and what the customer's pain points are. I didn't really know what you were talking about, an innovation process, right? We just thought the good times were going to continue into perpetuity. So think about, how would you go about implementing an innovation process in your business so that we're ready for the next big thing to come, right? And that next big thing, none of us really know when that's going to hit, but we know that something's going to hit, right? For those of us who've been around long enough, we probably remember the real estate boom. We remember in 2008, that cycle. We remember 9/11, right? So we've been around, we've seen this. So what I'd encourage everyone on the call to is think about, what's your innovation process look like? What's that cycle look like? And what's the accountabilities that you have with your leadership team, so that you continually look at your competencies and look at the problems to be solved and look at where the world's going. So they're always innovating and coming up with that next idea, not just to keep us in business, but to keep us out ahead of the pack and thriving. So it's said that if someone doesn't want to change, there's nothing you can do to change. But if someone is determined to change, there's nothing you can do to stop them. As I think about the comeback stories, I think about how I started our time today in our local comeback stories, right? You see, the ones that came back believed that they could win. They knew the game wasn't over. They knew that they needed to do whatever they needed to do in order to come out on top. And that would be an encouragement to each of us on the call, right? Are you determined to do what you've got to do to make those changes that you have to make in order to get the desirable outcomes? So some final thoughts. As a coach for 14 and a half, 15 years coming up on, often people would say, well, do you have the answer? Can you help me with the answer? I say, well, as a coach, I don't have all the answers, but I do have a lot of questions, and I know how to ask the right questions. So these are some of the questions I think that we have to ask. We have to reflect. We have to take action on. What's happened around me now? What's changed? What were our previous expectations, assumptions, and what do we need to rethink? What prospects that seemed unlikely years ago or even months ago that now could be accelerated? I have a couple of great stories of clients that are working with right now that they were working on some things and they had them on kind of in the back burner, kind of on slow cook, right? That when this thing in March hit, they just pulled it to the front burner and are tearing it up, right? And the outcomes for them are going to be really, really good and exciting. What do consumers value now? What they value now may be different than what they valued then. What might vary across region or demographics, right? What are some of the threats present today that weren't there 3 months ago? Are we positioned to succeed? What do we still need to learn more about? What are we prepared for? What are we currently ignoring, right? What are those things we're not talking about that we need to be talking about because we need to face the brutal facts, right? So we started our time together. I asked a question, what will be the new norm for our business? That new norm is really the beginning of our comeback story, right? And I think that's a great question for us to consider. What does that new norm look like in the VUCA world? So as we kind of start to wrap up here, think about your comeback story. Just 30 seconds quickly here. What's that one thing that you could do with the information that we provided today? What's that one thing that in your opinion would have the greatest positive impact on your future success? So just quickly, 30 minutes, jot your thoughts down, and then we'll start to circle around here and close it up. All right, great. So when I ask people that question, what's that one thing you could do to have the greatest positive impact on your future success? And then write it down. I generally ask people to take what they've written down and share that with somebody else. Maybe it's somebody on your executive team. Maybe it's a coworker. Maybe it's a spouse or significant other. But here's the thing. When you share it with somebody else, that's a form of accountability. And as I mentioned earlier, when you write something down, you're 2 times more likely to take action. When you share it with somebody else or have an accountability partner, you're another 2 times more likely to take action on it. So as a coach, I'm about action that produces results. So if there's one thing that I can tell you is that if you were to write it down and to share it with somebody else, you're 4 times more likely to take action on something that you've learned today. That's what we're trying to do, is with actions come results. And our results are going to be the theme of our comeback story. Perhaps it's the greatest comeback story ever, right? Perhaps your business comeback from COVID is the greatest story ever told. And I think it comes by looking at who's your core customer, what's the problem we have to solve or they have to solve, what are we really good at, our core competencies, and how do we continually innovate and create, and once we get to the top, stay on top. So when I think, would having a coach be helpful? Some of the things that a coach is helpful, CEO owner resilience. These are times that just wear us out, right? Are you resilient? How are you staying resilient? How are you keeping your mask on so that you're the best version of you so that you can help others in your organization? Sometimes a coach can help with cash flow and creating reserves or creating liquidity, finding those things in your income statement that need to be trimmed away, or finding new revenue opportunities. Working your strategy or repositioning your strategy, like we talked about today, around your core competencies and your customer's problem to be solved. Increasing customer retention. Sometimes we're called for implementing and helping with change management. Could be many of these, could be one of these, it could be all of these, right? But here's the deal. It's not the time to go at it alone, right? If you don't have a coach, get a coach. If you don't have a mentor, advisor, or counselor, get a mentor, advisor, or counselor. These are not times to go at alone. So anyway, one of the things that I'm trying to do just to help the community that I'm a part of is just to be there for people, right? A complimentary, no commitment, no charges, no question. I can't say no questions because a coach always asks questions, right? But a 45-minute coaching session to kind of just walk alongside of the business owners and the people in our community so that we get through this and we build that great comeback story. So simple way to do that. Remember, you don't need to remember my website. You don't need to remember my email address. Just text Meet Coach to 31996. It's as easy as that. You'll get a link and click on there and you can pick a time from my calendar and we'll get together and walk through this together. So with that concludes the presentation. Are there any questions? And I'll turn it back over to Andrew and Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Patrick. I think I'm on live now. And so really thanks for that. Very thought-provoking. And I know all of us are going through that. And I think that your last point, or the first of your last points here about CEO resilience and owner resilience, I think that's a critical part for people to think about what is the face that they're able to show to their own organization and their customers, right? So I think that's a critical point. But all of the points that you mentioned were really spot on, I think, to help companies get through this crisis. So thank you so much for partnering with us on this and being part of our ongoing series here to help businesses succeed. So I just wanted to share a little bit and about what we have going on and all of the things that we're doing from an organization standpoint at Greater Lafayette Commerce is thanks to our members and our sponsors. And so thank you again for all of the sponsors who've come to the table to help us get through and provide all of these QD, our quarterly development series that we've done virtually. So they're on the screen now. You can see them, and we really appreciate all of their support. We appreciate all of you as members of Greater Lafayette Commerce, and we are here to support you. I think our core competency is in our ability to provide resources and find people like Patrick to help you be successful in your business. So if you do have a need, if you're struggling with something, if you have a particular challenge, whether it's anything related to COVID-19 and getting your business up, or general business questions, feel free to use this as a resource to connect you to smart people who can help you. So coming up, we have a number of events. I'm going to talk about one that's tomorrow, which is our workforce mental health webinar. And we've been doing workforce development webinars on Thursdays, and tomorrow's at 9 a.m. We'll have local mental health experts share what supportive services they have for our community. And then, so if you want to register for that, just shoot Andrew, Amy, or I an email, or go online to our website. You can see that on our events calendar page, as well as you can see our Rise and Shine quarantine queues this Friday. And we will have, we'll be spotlighting Zoe France with Valley Oaks Health. She was on, I think, as well. And then on this seminar, and then our business innovation series is hosting Kathy Cherry and Tracy Brown with Paradigm Consulting on a webinar titled Build Resilience, Deal with Stress, and Improve Overall Well-Being During COVID-19 Times. And that's Monday, May 11th. And then please join us the following Monday, May 18th for 9 a.m. for a webinar with our state legislators talking about what's happening in the state and the things they're looking at for the summer sessions that they have, and what they're hearing about resources from the state to help as well. We have webinars on, again, a variety of other topics, workforce development, Tippy Connect, and community forums that can all be found on our website under greaterlafayettecommerce.com, and then click on the COVID-19 banner. Everything we've been doing, I think practically every webinar we've had or meeting we've had over the past 45 days is recorded, and you can find a link to it on our website. And thank you again to our sponsors, members, and all of you for participating. Be safe, healthy, and share resources, and we'll all be greater through that, greater together. So thank you again, and I'm just checking, make sure we don't have any questions that came in while I was talking, or on the chat function or Q&A, and I don't see any. So I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you again, Patrick. Really appreciate your support. Yeah. Thank you
for having me.
Excellent. Thank you.